Andy Powell, welcome to Australian Musician.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be with you.
It's been a crazy old year with this COVID business. How have you been handling it, and what has it meant to the band's plans?
Well, it's been a massive shock to the system. On the positive side, we had just completed an album, and we had done a couple of tours. We were planning to tour the entire year to support the album Coat of Arms, which is an album that was very important for us because it was released in the 50th year anniversary of the band's existence. So that was a positive. I'm so glad that we managed to squeeze that one out, as they say, and get that done. But on the negative side, we had a lot. I mean, we're a band that tours all the time, always have done. So on the negative side, it was like stumbling off the edge of a cliff. We had completed a German European tour the early part of the year, and then we had a couple of days off, and we steamed straight into an American tour of the South and the West Coast. And it was almost as if the COVID-19 was following us. It was about a week behind us for all these breakouts. We went down to New Orleans. I hit New Orleans on my 70th birthday, which was phenomenal. And then a week later, it was Mardi Gras, and it broke out there. Same thing in Southern California, all the way up the coast. And then, we really hit Armageddon when it was, we got to Seattle, which was the end of the tour. And the pandemic broke out in that city full force. And we were speaking to the people at the venue and saying, I don't know if we should play in this place. I don't think it's wise. And they were begging us. They said, we've already had 5 acts cancel in the last week. Could you think you could see your way clear? I said, well, as long as we do everything you can to sanitize and social distance. Well, we didn't have much information on all this at that point, but we literally finished that date. Everyone flew home, and that was it. That was lockdown, and that's where we've been for 5-6 months now.
Yeah. You mentioned Coat of Arms celebrating 50 years of the band. Not many bands have gone for 50 years. What do you attribute the band's longevity to?
Well, of course, there have been many members in this band, almost 30 members. The initial 4 members, that was a very specific, very, very precious time. The bands at that time, and you usually hit full stride on your 3rd album. And for us, our 3rd album was Argus. But as far as the longevity of the band, I would attribute that to laying down some really good roots. All of the band members that came from different parts of United Kingdom, the West Country, London, myself, and Birmingham for Ted Turner. I mean, we all had played in bands and were pretty well-tested musicians by the time we were out of our teens, And so the roots went into R&B, blues, rock and roll, all of the great influences through the 60s. And so I think those were really strong roots. And what was really great was that if you think about it, early 70s was an amazing flowering of British music, rock music, classic rock, as they call it now, but progressive. Every year or two, a new form of music came along. In the mid-60s, we had the British blues boom. The influence of people like Peter Green was massive on me. And then, they were also a band that dabbled to a fair degree in twin lead guitar playing when Danny Kerman joined the band. So that was an influence. But the amount of road work that we did in those first 3 or 4 years was intense. Probably almost 200 gigs a year. And it's actually never stopped being that way. And so I think the road has been a place that we feel most comfortable with. Our biggest selling record ever was an album recorded on the road, and that was called Live Dates, mid-70s. But through all the incarnations of the band, we've always been known as a players band and a band that delivers on stage and gets down there with the people. And we've got that kind of veritas, And you know, we've had success with albums, but it's not the main component in our longevity. I would just say, just always delivering the goods, being a band of the people, getting out there, treading the boards, doing what musicians do. It's gained us the respect of fellow musicians and of audiences in general. And of course, the big thing, you know, and when the internet came on along in the 90s, we were able to take over our community. I very specifically realized that, you know, the fan community was what was going to sustain us. And the internet helped us connect with those people because, you know, the interest in rock and the power of magazines and the printed word was waning. So that was a massive thing that kind of springboarded us, you know, into, you know, the next few decades, really, the 90s and the noughties, you know.
Yeah. You were talking about the dual guitar lines, which, of course, people had been doing before, but you did it so prominently and have been such an influence on so many other bands, such as Thin Lizzy and Iron Maiden, and even guitarists like Dick Hunter and Steve Wagner from Alice Cooper, Lou Reed. They were
most definitely.
Yeah,
we toured with Steve, with Alice Cooper in the States, so they very definitely saw Wishbone Ash and got that influence. But yeah, you're right. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in on you. Carry on.
Yeah, I was just going to say you've been a massive influence. Why did you sort of take on that element and run with it?
That's a great question. I think you're right. There had been other bands doing it. Blossom Toes was a band in the mid-'60s in Britain that done it, featuring Jim Cregan, that did a little bit. Fleetwood Mac did it to a fair degree. Then of course, we got a hold of it. I don't think there's any band that's probably done more with it. And as you quite rightly say, we influenced Lizzy, that's for sure. We were the first band they saw when they got off the boat from Ireland in London at the Lyceum Ballroom. And Phil said to the band that we need a sound, and that's the fucking sound we're going to use, you know. And they did it great. I mean, he's a great front man. But I think that, as I was saying earlier, from the mid-'60s to the late 60s, it was apparent that every band that came along had to be something fresh. Every movement in music had to be quite specific. And, you know, we had this intense burst of energy with the players like Beck, Clapton, and all these individual guys. And no one had really taken the twin lead thing to the level that I could see it could be taken to. And I may have mentioned, you know, I was in soul bands and so forth. And in the 60s, before I joined Wishbone Ash, fourth band was formed. And I had a huge amount of experience working with horn sections. And it occurred to us that a really cool thing to do with the guitars was to have them voice a little bit like a horn section in harmony, harmonizing, punctuating the songs with these riffs. And indeed, the first song that we ever wrote as a band was a song called Blind Eye, which is really a nod to Fleetwood Mac. In as much as it was a shuffle, it was a blues tune with Matthew Fisher on piano. And the song, the verses were punctuated by this little, it was actually a horn riff, but it was played on guitars. And of course, we would use that to open our set. And it was electrifying, you know, because it was this very dynamic, punchy riff with these two guitars. And then coupled with that, we were very specific with our sound. We wanted a very clean, melodic sound. And so we used clean sounding orange amplification. And the bass was also really important because Martin Turner worked on the bass lines in conjunction with the guitar playing. So often you had three things working in harmony, which was a powerful sound, you know. You had this bass guitar was played almost like a lead guitar, and then these two clean-sounding lead guitar players in harmony. It was unstoppable. It was a fresh sound, and people lapped it up.
Yeah. The other thing you're famous for is playing Flying Vs. Why did you gravitate to Flying Vs and not Les Pauls or Strats?
Another really good question. I was looking for gear, I was in London, and the Orange store had just opened in Denmark Street. I was trying out these amps, and as coincidence would have it, Cliff Cooper, the owner of the company, still is today, had two of these Flying Vs on the wall. Of course, I've been aware of Albert King. I played an SG before that. I made homemade guitars. I played. Couldn't afford decent guitars, but I got this SG, and I said, well, I need to try this amp out. Have you got a guitar I could try? And he went, I said, what about that one? Flying V. Wow, I haven't seen one of those. I think there was the only two Flying Vs in London at the time. And there were 67 models, so they were already 4 years old, but they'd never been played. They were still in the packing cases. They'd come over from America. So I played this guitar, and it had the whammy bar on it, like, my old Strat that I had, or my homemade Strat. And, and unlike a Les Paul, I suddenly realized playing this guitar, even before I plugged it in, it was very vibrant. For a Gibson, it was quite a ringy sounding guitar. Gibsons are generally noted to be quite mellow sounding and, quite a beefy mid-range. But this guitar, it had a rock thing about it, and which was that twang, and you could work the whammy bar, and it was beautiful for chording. And plus it had a very tiny little neck at the nut, and it suited my then very small hands. And so all those factors, and I just fell in love with the gear, and I fell in love with the guitar. I said to salesperson, I don't think it was Cliff at the time, I don't think he was in store, but I said, how much is that guitar? It was £300. And I was just like, that seemed like a fortune to me, but I somehow managed to blag £300 and took this guitar home and just fell in love with it. I just idolized the guitar. I put it on a chair at the end of my bed, my little bed sit, and I just drew. I couldn't believe that I was the owner of this exotic thing. And I was a skinny little kid. I weighed about 120 pounds, and this guitar was a big thing, big long fins on it. And I just somehow realized that it was a performer's guitar. You couldn't sit down with it. And I would wrap my body around it, and it just became one with the guitar. I still play them today. I love them. So that it worked really well with Ted Turner's Gibson Les Paul, and then later his Strat. It was a guitar that you could play nice rhythm lines on. It was had a lot of clarity and definition, but it sung like a beast. If you listen to my guitar soloing on the Argus album, you can hear, tunes like Sometime World, and then especially the song Throw Down the Sword. It's a really fruity, tooty, sustaining guitar sound that really became a rock type sound. And then, was the interesting thing about it was that a lot of soon to become heavy metal players picked up on the guitar because it looked heavy. There wasn't, they hadn't actually coined the phrase heavy metal at that point. But I think a lot of the younger crowd, just like I was to, say, Peter Green and Eric Clapton, I was 3 or 4 years younger, maybe 5 years younger. The crowd that was watching us, that were, maybe 15, 16 years of age, they cottoned on to the Flying V. And at that point, it was not a cool guitar. It had not established its place in the world of rock. I think Gibson were quite miffed that when they released the guitar, it was a bit of a dud. It was too far-fetched. It was too futuristic for players. They were more they went with the Stratocaster, which was plenty futuristic enough, or the Les Paul, as you mentioned. But then after that point in time, I was on the boards traveling around for 2 or 3 years, and you'd see pictures of me in the Melody Maker and the music magazines playing that Gibson Flying V, and I think I'll venture to say I made the guitar cool, and I made it a desirable thing for other players to take the brave step and start using it. There were very, very few people playing that guitar until I made it popular. As I say, there was Albert King, of course. That was on a different circuit. Keith Richards dabbled with one. Dave Davis had one on a TV show once. But the mid-60s V, the one I popularized, that was not an item until, you know, I made it so. I would venture to say that.
Yeah, no arguments here. Fast forward 50 years, Coat of Arms is out. You guys live all over the world. Did you record together?
Yeah, we wrote the album in France, in Saint-Etienne, where my sound guy lives. We recorded it in Lancashire together at a studio in Lancashire, and we mixed it in. No, we did some overdubs at my house in Connecticut. We mixed it in New York, and we mastered it at Abbey Road, London. So, yeah, we we used all the global elements on that one.
Yeah. The other thing that...
Oh, sorry, and I forgot to mention, of course, the record label was German.
Okay. The other thing that you have done reasonably is released a book, Eyes Wide Open. Have you kept diaries over the years, or do you just have a very good memory?
I have kept diaries, not of events, more of events, but not thoughts and that kind of thing. So writing a book was really one of the most difficult things I think I've ever done, because I did have a lot of memories, but I hadn't spent that much time writing them down, certainly not at the time. Probably the most eventful decade for me was the 70s. And that was just one giant party, you know. So it took an awful lot of time to sort out the moments in time and the key events that happened in that decade, because they all tended to, in my mind, blur together. So I did have the help of a researcher, Colin Harper, who co-wrote the book with me. He's a journalist, and we would have these little sessions in Dublin. He's Irish. And when I was flying over from New York to London on my frequent trips, I would stop off there and meet up with him. And he was able to say, you know, if I was confused about a date, he was able to say, well, cast your mind back. This was happening and that was happening at the time. And then that would center me, and that would get things located in the right year. But it was an interesting thing to do, fantastic thing to do, hard thing to do, and I'm really glad I did it.
Yeah. I believe you toured Australia in the 70s.
Yes.
Australia was a very different place back then. What are your memories of that tour?
Well, the first thing I remember was getting off the plane, and we had a press conference, and some bright spark said, "What do you think of Australia then, Andy?" And I went, "I don't know. I just got here, mate." You know, but the funny thing is, I have relatives in Australia and New Zealand, so I was really happy to go there. But yeah, you're right. It was very right. It was primitive in many respects. We had a school friend that had moved there, and we did have a fair bit of downtime, which I don't think a lot of musicians get that when they tour Australia, because it's such a long way to go. And, you know, it's usually you play some dates and then you're in there and you're out. But we actually, you know, I wanted to get into the bush, and not the bush, what do they call it? The outback, yeah. And we did some camping up in the Blue Mountains outside of Sydney. Saw a lot of wildlife. I was blown away by the amount of wildlife there. Yeah, the crowds went bonkers. It was all in all, it was all good, you know. It was just some incredible memories. I mean, I remember we were touring Australia at the same time that the Osborne brothers were touring there, and we ended up staying in the same hotel as them, and that was kind of bizarre. I remember walking around the King's Cross area, Sydney, Melbourne, very nice, very sedate. Oh yeah, Brisbane, very, very nice. I had relatives up there. Yeah, I didn't get across to Perth, unfortunately.
Yeah. With this COVID thing happening, what are the revised plans for Wishbone Ash for 2020?
Well, we've restructured all the dates that we lost for that year, for 2021. How that's going to progress, no one knows, do they? I mean, I think you've done a pretty good job of tamping down the COVID thing in Oz, haven't you?
Reasonably, yeah. A little outbreak in Melbourne where I am, but it's getting under control.
Yeah, it's not the case in America where I'm living. In Connecticut, it's quite good. We've had some spikes locally, but in other parts of the country, it's pretty horrendous. There's issues like if you want to go overseas, they don't want to see Americans in their country right now. Yeah, I just think it's month by month. I mean, I remember earlier in the year, people were saying that by this time of the year, you know, things would be a lot easier, but they've become worse in America. We're doing a god-awful job of it here. There's no help at all from the government, as in my view, or not the right help. And so I think the jury's out, Greg, on how it's going to progress in the beginning of 2021. But we've got dates in Germany starting in January. Germany's done a pretty good job, but it's jumped through all the hoops to get there. You know, what am I going to do? Get off a plane and quarantine for 2 weeks with the rest of the band? I don't know.
Yeah,
just don't know. You know, it's not. It's something that's out of our hands at the moment. But we've done all due diligence and booked the dates. Our agents have worked hard, you know, and everything's booked again through that year for the first half of the year.
yeah. So Coat of Arms is out. I guess the website is the best place to find the album.
Yeah, wishboneash.com. You can see about the album. It's available on Amazon and all that, of course, and downloading through the usual channels. Yeah, I would always urge people to buy the album at shows. You know, it's better for us. But since there are no shows, and if you haven't heard the album, get it by other means. You know.
Yeah. All right, Andy Powell, it's been great to catch up, and thanks for joining us.
My total pleasure, Greg. Thank you so much.
Okay.